What are these, you may wonder? I'm Paul and this is Diary of a Stock Photographer. What are these, you may wonder? These are called clip tests. In the days of film, I used to have 10 frames on a roll of film shooting on medium format 6x7, normally on the Pentax 6x7. And with a manual camera you would often alter the exposure, and in those days, instead of bracketing, which meant you'd change the exposure a little to get it perfect exposure, if you shot 10 frames the same, like this, it would make it easier to get 10 perfect images. You'd shoot 10 frames at the same exposure, send the roll of film to the lab, and then the lab would cut the last frame off, process the last frame and send it back to me. And then I would see what the exposure would be like. And then from these I could see whether they would need more processing or less processing. And so you could give the different rolls of film more processing in the processing tanks that would make the films brighter or darker. So you'd have 8 perfect frames instead of 1 or 2 if you were bracketing. And that way you could give more frames to the photo library, and they would keep these to send to other offices around the world. How times have changed compared to now, when you can shoot digitally and get the image perfect first time. In those days, when you shot on a camera that had only a manual setting, it was slightly more difficult to get the exposure correct every time. My favourite film was Fuji Velvia. This was ISO 50, and generally Fujifilm was renowned for the greens and warm colours it would produce, which was fantastic for landscapes. Kodak film at the time was often considered very good for skin tones, so this was often used for portraits. But generally myself and everybody I knew, we were all using Fuji Velvia or Fuji Provia, which was ISO 100. And generally, I think I remember using medium format film and enjoyed this the most because it was the easiest to use and you got the largest transparencies. Although it was difficult opening those wrappers on many occasions when it was really cold. There was many times when I went to places like New York where I'm standing under Brooklyn Bridge and it's -10 and your hands are so cold you couldn't even open the film wrappers and load the film. In the days when I shot film, it was quite common to leave your film in your fridge because this would help preserve the colours, because there was a shelf life to the film. So often you would put the film in the fridge. Fuji Velvia 120 you could buy in packs of 5, so the boxes like this. So I used to have my fridge filled with these packs of green boxes in the fridge next to the milk. I'm Paul and this is Diary of a Stock Photographer. I've not really made any major mistakes regarding photographing an object or a scene and not having any rolls of film in the camera, but I do remember being on location in Cairo and it was a fantastic scene of the pyramids and had a camel in the foreground, but I completely messed up the exposure by, it was about -2 stops. So these images of the camel and the pyramids looked like they were almost complete darkness, which was quite a shame at the time because it was a fantastic scene, and I quite regret not getting the correct exposure at the time. But things were a lot more precarious than they are now, where you had to make sure you got the correct exposure because film was quite intolerant of getting the exposure wrong, and quite often you need to use a light meter or a stopwatch at night time if you were shooting for long exposures, and it's not quite as tolerant as being able to use digital cameras shooting raw currently.
Greetings YouTubers, my name is Paul and this is my shiny new channel, Diary of a Stock Photographer. I was lucky to have a career in stock photography when there was much less competition at a time when images sold as rights managed and rather than royalty free, and prices were much higher than they were now. I went travelling around the world just to shoot stock and made a good profit from those images. Very different to what it is today. And it may be interesting for people now to see how the industry has changed along the way. So join me each week as I share stories from my career as a stock photographer, stories behind those images, top tips on photography, and talking to others in the industry about their careers.